Okay, let's unpack this. What if the nothing of space isn't empty at all? But maybe, just maybe, it's the birthplace of literally everything. What if the void we perceive, the quiet emptiness between stars, or even like the vast spaces inside an atom, what if that's actually infinitely dense, teeming with unseen potential, and profoundly shaping our very reality in ways we're, well, just beginning to fathom? Today, we're not just diving into some new scientific concept. We're exploring a framework that could radically redefine our understanding of the universe. And honestly, ourselves too.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this framework challenges our very perception of emptiness. It proposes this fundamental generative substrate that, well, we've largely overlooked. For centuries, across different fields, we've tended to think of emptiness as just, well, empty, absence. But this new perspective completely flips that on its head. It suggests that what seems absent is, in fact, maybe the most potent presence there is.
That's it, exactly. And this isn't just some slight tweak to existing models, right? For this deep dive, we're delving into a pretty revolutionary new theoretical framework. It posits two distinct types of vacuum, and they're radically different from the standard models we know, and very different from each other. Our source material for this, well, kind of mind-bending journey comes from excerpts from Coherence and the Two Vacuums by Philip Lilien, published just this year, 2025. And this isn't merely some abstract theoretical exercise, is it? Lillian's work proposes a really profound ontological and physical distinction, one that promises to maybe unravel mysteries we've barely even begun to grasp, connecting dots from like the smallest particles all the way up to the grandest cosmic structures.
Yeah, our mission today is really to dissect Lillian's insight, which is, frankly, groundbreaking. We're going to try and unpack the profound ontological, what it is, and the physical distinctions between these two vacuums. We'll explore their energetic roles, their functional roles in reality, and then we'll delve into what sounds like a completely new form of thermodynamics that applies specifically to them. This could potentially overturn our long-held assumptions about how the universe tends towards order or disorder. We'll even touch on the formal mathematical language used to describe this intricate dance. And finally, we need to consider the staggering implications this framework holds for, well, pretty much everything. From fundamental physics and cosmology to the very nature of biology, artificial intelligence, and maybe even potential new energy sources down the line. It's a vast, interconnected landscape of ideas for sure. I will guide you through it, hopefully with some surprising facts, compelling insights, and maybe some engaging analogies that help these complex ideas really land.
This is definitely a concept that makes you rethink what empty means. It hints at a universe far more active, maybe even more intentional than we might have imagined. Let's delve into this foundational idea. So, you might think of a vacuum as just nothing, right? A perfect void. Silence, no matter. But modern physics, well, it's already given us a much wilder picture than that. For decades now, we've known about the quantum vacuum, or QV. Physics tells us that even what we perceive as empty space is actually buzzing with activity, yeah? It's far from inert.
That's absolutely right. The quantum vacuum, or QV, represents our conventional understanding, and honestly, it's already quite counterintuitive for most people. It's not truly empty. It's understood as the lowest energy state within a quantized field. Think of it maybe like a vast invisible ocean that even when it looks perfectly calm on the surface, is perpetually agitated by this faint underlying hum. This hum is the constant fleeting emergence and disappearance of particles and antiparticles, what physicists call virtual particles. They pop in and out of existence so fast we can't observe them directly, but crucially, they leave measurable effects.
Okay, so it's already a vibrant, dynamic place, not just empty. What are some of the known features of this quantum vacuum that physicists agree on?
Well, we characterize the QV by several known features. It's constantly alive with these quantum fluctuations, which are essentially temporary changes in the amount of energy at any given point in space. These fluctuations, they give rise to real phenomena, like the Casimir forces. That's where you take two uncharged parallel metal plates, put them really close together in a vacuum, and they experience this slight attractive force. And the reason? Basically, there are fewer possible virtual particle modes between the plates than outside them, creating this tiny pressure imbalance pushing them together. So it's a dynamic environment confirmed by experiments, even if it's sort of a residual activity.
Right, residual. So it's already pretty wild, full of this invisible activity. But Lillian's work highlights a really critical limitation here, doesn't it? Like there's a missing piece in our understanding of the universe's true generative power if we only consider the QV.
Precisely. While the quantum vacuum is indeed active and absolutely foundational to quantum field theory as we know it, it's described in this framework as fundamentally entropically limited. The source material explicitly calls it a residual field.
Mm.
And that's a crucial distinction. It's essentially the residue of coherence, not coherence's origin. Think back to that ocean analogy. The QV is maybe like the ephemeral foam left after a big wave has crashed on the shore. It's there, it's active for a moment, but it's dissipating, subject to the laws of entropy, right? It's what's left after things have manifested, not the primordial, ever-generating ocean itself. It reflects the outcome of processes, yeah, but it doesn't seem to initiate new, complex, self-organizing processes from scratch.
Okay, so that's the familiar QV, still mind-bending, but familiar in physics circles. But here's where we introduce the really radical concept, the thing that could revolutionize physics. The coherence vacuum, or CV. Lilien describes this as the primordial generative field, the ontological ground state from which all coherent structures emerge. I mean, that's an incredibly profound idea. It redefines what we even mean by nothing.
Indeed. The coherence vacuum, the CV, is presented as something fundamentally different. It's not just a slightly less empty space, or maybe a more active version of the QV, not at all. Lilien posits that the CV is not empty. Instead, it's infinitely dense in potential. Now, this isn't about physical density like packing particles together. It's about an unbounded capacity for generating reality. It's described as a superpositioned coherent state beyond space-time constraints. That's key. Imagine maybe a vast cosmic orchestra before a single note is played. It holds every possible symphony, every harmony, every melody, all at once, in this state of pure, unmanifested potential. And crucially, it's unconstrained by the familiar rules of time and space that govern our universe.
So it's not bound by our universe's rules. It exists before them, in a sense.
Exactly. And crucially, it's stated to be the source of dimensional emergence, not a byproduct of it. This is a fundamental reversal of cause and effect compared to what we typically assume in physics. We often think of fields and particles interacting within space-time, maybe even giving rise to space and time in some models. But here, the CV exists prior to space-time. It's actively generating dimensions, forces, particles from its coherent potential. It's not just a consequence of them. It's the ultimate foundational layer of reality itself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because this isn't just like a slightly different kind of vacuum we're talking about. It sounds like a fundamentally different kind of reality, almost a different order of existence altogether. Let's really dig into these distinct properties because the differences Lilien lays out between the CV and QV are stark. They're almost like comparing, I don't know, a blueprint to the finished building's shadow.
From an ontological perspective, which just to remind everyone means studying the nature of being and existence itself, the coherence vacuum, the CV, is proposed as the infinite pre-quantized generative field. It's described as a nigentropic ontological substrate. That's a mouthful, but it means it's the underlying reality that naturally tends towards increasing order and complexity, and operates entirely beyond our familiar space-time. It's a pure, boundless source symbolized by representing that infinite coherence reservoir from which all reality flows. Now contrast that sharply with the quantum vacuum, QV. It's depicted as the minimal energy state after coherence reduction has already happened. It's a derivative, a consequence. It's a decoherence-bound residue. It's the result of processes that have already occurred, not the initiator. It's symbolized by euro, indicating a zero-point decoherent remainder, like you said, maybe a kind of energetic ash left behind after the fire of creation.
And when we talk about energetic potential, wow, the difference sounds equally vast, almost unfathomable. The CV is called infinitely fecund, which just means incredibly fertile, right? Endlessly productive, capable of giving birth to new structures, new forms. It apparently contains the full generative spectrum of coherence amplitudes. You described it as a deep ocean of potential reality, a bottomless one that never depletes. But the energy itself is different too. It's not like the thermal energy, the random bouncing of particles we usually measure.
That's a critical point. The energy within the CV isn't like thermal or statistical energy. It's described as structured through coherence gradients and resonant eigenfields. It's a different kind of energy, highly organized, structured, purposeful, almost poised for emergence. It has directionality built into it.
Okay, so it's organized potential energy.
Precisely. Contrast that again with the QV. The QV is characterized as a surface residue, maybe just ripples on the surface of that deep, profound ocean. Now, it certainly contains residual zero-point energy, ZPE, which we can detect, and that makes it appear active and energetic to our current instruments. However, and this is critical, Lilien states it's fundamentally non-generative in itself. It lacks the intrinsic directional coherence needed to self-organize and initiate new emergence. So while the energy of the CV, let's call it ECV, is stated to be vastly, vastly greater than the QV's energy, EQV, it's vital to remember that ECV is coherent structured. It's organized potential, not just chaotic thermal or random energy. It's the difference between, say, a laser beam and the heat radiating off a light bulb. Both are energy, but one is highly coherent and directed, the other is diffuse and statistical. So if the CV is the master architect, the ultimate source, what's its functional role in reality? How does it do things? Lilien's work describes it as metagenerative. What does that mean exactly? Metagenerative means it seeds all dimensional fields, forces, and particles. It's the source behind the sources, if you like. It's also described as pre-quantum, meaning it exists prior to and independently from the process of particle field quantization that defines quantum mechanics. And it's resonance causal. This is fascinating. It operates not by traditional force interactions like gravity pulling things together or electromagnetism pushing and pulling charges. Instead, it operates by coherence resonance, a more subtle, harmonic connection or alignment that causes things to spontaneously align and emerge together, like tuning forks vibrating in sympathy. And lastly, it's hyperfractal. This means it serves as the source of layered dimensional emergence, suggesting that patterns repeat themselves at different scales throughout the universe, from the smallest quantum levels to the largest cosmic structures, all originating from this single, coherent fractal source. It's fundamentally prior to our universe as we experience it, actively shaping its very fabric from beyond spacetime.
Wow, okay. And the quantum vacuum, the QV, its functional role is completely different then.
Completely different, yes. In stark contrast, the QV is post-reduction. It only appears after dimensionalization and field quantization have occurred, as a consequence of the CV's generative process unfolding. It's fluctuation-based, described probabilistically via the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, just as we understand it in conventional quantum mechanics. It's a realm of probabilities and temporary energy shifts, not deterministic creation. It's decoherence locked. This means it's bound to entropic spacetime causality. It follows the arrow of time, tends towards increasing disorder, and operates within the rules of our spacetime. And finally, it's observation reactive. It gets perturbed when we measure it, as quantum mechanics tells us, but it doesn't truly generate anything new itself. It reflects and reacts to the reality that already exists, rather than originating it. It's the echo, definitely not the voice.
This really sounds like a completely different set of rules applying to these two states. We're so used to thinking about entropy, right? The universe tending towards disorder, everything eventually leading towards heat death. What about their thermodynamic character? How does that change with this new framework? This seems huge.
That's precisely where the distinction gets even sharper, and it offers a truly revolutionary perspective. The coherence vacuum is described as inherently negentropic and coherence stabilizing. This is a critical departure from our standard understanding of thermodynamics. It means that the CV naturally allows for and promotes organization, emergence, and symmetry to arise spontaneously. Its energy isn't just passive potential, it's coherent, structured, and preformal meaning. It has the inherent potential for increasing order, not just maintaining it or succumbing to disorder. And this raises a really important question for all of us, doesn't it? If one vacuum actively builds order and the other only reflects its breakdown, what does that imply about the universe's inherent long-term tendencies? Is the universe fundamentally biased towards order or towards chaos?
That's a massive question. And the QV, how does it fit into the thermodynamic picture we're familiar with?
The quantum vacuum, on the other hand, fits squarely within the realm of classical thermodynamics. It's characterized as entropically spent and non-generative.
Yep.
It cannot spontaneously form new complex order. It can only residually perturb existing systems through its fluctuations. Its energy is decoherent and statistical, aligning perfectly with our conventional understanding of thermal energy and the relentless increase of entropy. It's the end state of a generative process, a system that has already utilized its creative potential rather than the beginning of one. It's the static after the signal has faded.
So what does this all mean for us, trying to grasp this profound difference? Lilien gives us some really helpful metaphors that kind of bring this abstract idea to life. He says it's like saying one is the infinite, boundless ocean from which all waves emerge, and the other is just the splash on the surface, the flicker after the wave has crashed and its energy has dissipated. The CV is the infinite amplitude. The QV is the flicker after collapse. The CV is the ontological seedbed. The QV is the ash of coherence. I find these analogies really drive home the profound and fundamental difference between them.
Yes, they capture the essence perfectly, I think. One is the fertile ground of all potential, always generating, always organizing. It's the wellspring from which everything flows. The other is the residual effect, the echo of that creative process, already played out and bound by entropic decay. It's a fundamental shift, really, from seeing our physical reality as emerging from some kind of energetic randomness or fluctuation to seeing it as a structured manifestation of an infinitely rich, pre-existent something. It redefined emptiness as the ultimate fullness, the source of all being.
Now let's get a bit more formal for a minute because this isn't just, poetic speculation. Lilien presents it as a profound theoretical framework with its own definitions, its own structure, and its own precise symbolic language. We're moving into what he calls the Ontological Scroll, a way to visualize this grand cosmic cascade from infinite potential down to our observable reality.
Indeed. And it's essential to define these concepts precisely within the framework to really appreciate it. As we've discussed, the coherence vacuum, or CV, is defined as the infinite, pre-quantized, generative field of coherence. It's the source from which all form, energy, and dimensionality emerge. It's described as a negentropic ontological substrate again, that fundamental layer of reality that intrinsically drives towards order and complexity. It's a pure field of coherence amplitudes before any reduction into physical form. It operates beyond space-time and probabilistic quantization. This means it doesn't adhere to the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics as we know it, nor is it constrained by time or space. Instead, it structures all emergence through resonant coherence gradients, a kind of harmonic alignment or potential difference. It is precisely symbolized by J. capturing that idea of an infinite, unbounded coherence reservoir.
And just to clarify once more for everyone listening, the quantum vacuum, QV, how's that formally defined here?
The quantum vacuum, QV, is formally defined as the minimal energy state of a quantized field that appears after coherence reduction has occurred. It exhibits the familiar quantum fluctuations at virtual particles that physicists have observed and measured. But, and this is the critical distinction in this framework, it fundamentally lacks generative capacity. It is a derivative, a consequence, not a cause. It's a decoherence-bound residue, meaning it's locked into a state of decreasing organization and is entropically constrained. It's symbolized by the zero-point decoherent remainder, representing what's left behind once the primary generative process has taken place.
Okay. And this framework also gives us some key symbols, notations that help us visualize and talk about this process, almost like following a cosmic blueprint. We have very more for the infinite coherence vacuum field than for the zero-point quantum vacuum field. But crucially, there are these operators that describe the action happening between these two states, right? There's YAR, which is the coherence gradient. What does that symbolize exactly?
Johannes, the coherence gradient symbolizes the driving force behind emergence. It represents the structured resonance, the potential difference, if you will, that causes coherence to flow and structure reality. Imagine it like the pressure difference that causes wind or water to flow. But here, it's a gradient in coherence potential. Then there's O-no, the coherence reduction operator. This signifies the active process that reduces this infinite coherence, bringing it down into space-time expression, making it manifest in our observable reality. And finally, there's the concept of a decoherence limit. This represents the threshold beyond which the active generative emergence of coherence from the CV effectively ceases for a given system, leaving it in the realm governed by the QV.
Got it. So these symbols are like the verbs in the cosmic sentence.
That's a great way to put it. They become crucial as we outline what Lilien calls the equation cascade, which isn't just a list of equations, but more like a narrative describing the universe's generative process. First, we have primordial generativity. This describes the fundamental transition starting from the infinite potential coherence of the coherence vacuum. This boundless potential then navigates through, or is guided by, the coherence gradient. This process ultimately leads to dimensional emergence. What this means, essentially, is that the infinite potential of the CV doesn't just explode chaotically. Instead, it's sculpted and guided by these coherence gradients, resulting in the structured formation of dimensions, fields, forces, and all the fundamental constituents of our reality. It's presented as an elegant, ordered unfolding, not a random event.
So it's not a chaotic burst, but more like a precise, structured unfolding, like a seed developing into a complex plant according to its internal blueprint.
Exactly. It's a blueprint manifesting itself through these gradients. Then, following that emergence, we have the crucial process of reduction to quantum vacuum. This is where the coherence reduction operator, AGIA, comes into play. It acts upon that generative coherence field, media, actively transforming it, reducing it into its residual, decoherent form, the quantum vacuum. Once this reduction occurs, the vacuum behaves statistically, as we observe the quantum vacuum to do. It's no longer considered ontologically fecund or generative in that primary sense. Its creative potential, in a way, has been spent or focused in the act of materialization. It seems to be a kind of one-way transformation in that direction.
And this makes perfect sense when we look back at the energy flow contrast you mentioned earlier. The energy of the coherence vacuum, ECV, is vastly greater than the QV's energy, EQV. That implies an almost inexhaustible source, but, and this is the key distinction again, the energy of the CV is explicitly coherent structured, not thermal or statistical. It's not about heat or random particle motion, but about exquisitely organized potential.
Precisely. It's like comparing the raw, boundless potential energy stored in a huge, perfectly designed hydroelectric dam's reservoir to the sporadic, random flicker of a dying candle flame. The quantum vacuum, with its bounded zero-point fluctuations, is just a faint whisper compared to the infinite, highly organized potential attributed to the coherence vacuum. And this visual scroll idea Lilien presents is a really powerful way to understand this flow, this cascade from infinite potential down to the reality we observe. It helps illustrate how fundamental symmetries in particles could arise directly from this underlying coherence. He calls it the ontological scroll, a meta-resonance cascade. So imagine unrolling this cosmic scroll, showing a continuous flow. You start at the very top of the coherence vacuum, CV, symbolized by N and Pierre. At this pristine level, you have infinite resonance amplitude. This is the ultimate generator of all emergence. It's described as intrinsically hyperfractal in nature, meaning its patterns repeat at every scale, maybe from the grandest cosmic structures down to the smallest quantum fluctuations. It is fundamentally negentropic, always tending towards organization, and it exists as timeless, pre-space-time reality, untouched by the arrow of time that we experience.
Okay, so that's the absolute source. And then you have the arrow showing the flow downward, the unfolding, driven by that coherence gradient providing the structure. What comes next as this infinite potential begins to formalize?
Well, according to the scroll, this gradient leads first to the emergence of dimensional resonance fields. These are seen as the underlying structures from which our physical dimensions, length, width, height, time, eventually arise. Following that, we see the emergence of the fundamental gauge symmetries, things like U1, SU2, and SU3. Now, for our listeners, these are the mathematical symmetries that are known to govern electromagnetism: the weak nuclear force, responsible for radioactive decay, and the strong nuclear force, which binds atomic nuclei together, respectively. These fundamental rules of physics emerge here. And from there, through a process precisely termed coherent splitting, arise the bosons and fermions, which are the fundamental particles that make up all matter, like electrons and quarks, and mediate all forces, like photons. So we're showing this direct, elegant lineage from the infinite coherent source right down to the very building blocks of our known universe.
Wow. So the very fabric of reality, the forces that govern it, the particles that compose it, all spring naturally from this coherent source according to this model. And then comes the big transition, right? The point of collapse or reduction into the reality we directly perceive and measure.
Exactly. After these intricate structures emerge from the coherence, we encounter the cohen, the coherence reduction operator. This operator is what signifies the transition down to the quantum vacuum, QV, symbolized by Et. At this final stage shown on the scroll, we are in the realm of the zero-point statistical field. It's explicitly derivative and post-reduction. It's entropic, decoherence bound, meaning it's subject to the laws of increasing disorder and cannot spontaneously generate new coherence from within itself. It is now characterized by the familiar virtual particles, and the Casimir forces all the aspects of the quantum vacuum that standard physics deals with today. It's presented as the final, reduced state of this particular cascade, having seemingly shed its boundless generative potential in the very act of becoming manifest reality.
It's almost poetic when you lay it out like that, isn't it? This framework seems to suggest this deep underlying being, that infinite coherent source that continuously gives rise to the appearance of our world, the manifest reality we experience. It really redefines what creation might mean, moving beyond just a single point in the past to potentially an ongoing cascade.
It truly is a profound philosophical shift. The core contrast is stark. The coherence vacuum is described as timeless, boundless, and purely coherent. It represents pure, unmanifested potential, a state perhaps of perfect unity or integration. The quantum vacuum, in contrast, is temporal, statistical, and fragmented. It's the realm of what we experience every day, bound by the flow of time and the inherent probabilities of quantum mechanics. Lilien frames this transition from CV-EQV as the ontological fall, a kind of collapse, a reduction from infinite possibility into a partial, materialized, and ultimately entropically bound expression. Philosophically, you could say it positions the CV as pure being, the fundamental ground of all existence, while the QV is merely appearance, a consequence or shadow of that being's unfolding. The CV is coherence's seed, its boundless generative core. The QV is perhaps its fossil, a remnant of what was once infinitely unified and perfectly ordered.
Okay, this is where things get really counterintuitive for anyone familiar with basic physics. We all learn about entropy, right? That fundamental law stating the universe tends towards disorder. Coffee gets cold, buildings crumble, stars burn out. The standard picture is a universe heading towards a state of ultimate uniformity and inaction, the heat death. But this theory, it truly turns that traditional understanding on its head, doesn't it? At least for this deeper layer of reality. It introduces a whole new way of thinking about thermodynamics, specifically applied to these two distinct vacuums.
Absolutely. This section is where the implications become incredibly formal and potentially far-reaching. It reveals what Lilien calls a new hierarchy of thermodynamic potentials, rooted in this unified coherence framework. And the key takeaway is that within this framework, order can emerge naturally, maybe even inevitably, from the deeper vacuum. The crucial point is that traditional entropy-based thermodynamics, with its famous 3 or 4, depending how you count, laws, conservation of energy, increase of entropy, absolute zero being unattainable. This framework suggests that applies only to the quantum vacuum, and by extension, to the manifest decohered universe we inhabit. What's revolutionary here is the concept that the coherence vacuum follows a distinct, entirely different, coherence-based thermodynamic logic. It's a complete paradigm shift in how we might think about universal order, energy flow, complexity, and the very arrow of time itself.
Okay, let's break that down. These two thermodynamic orders. How do the CV and QV stack up side by side across different properties when viewed through this new thermodynamic lens?
All right, let's compare them. First, ontology, the nature of their being. As we firmly established, the CV is the generative substrate, the fundamental source. The QV, conversely, is the post-reduction residue that's left over. Now, entropy. This is key. The CV is described as having zero entropy, not just low entropy, but inherently negentropic. It possesses an intrinsic tendency towards increasing organization and complexity, not towards disorder. The QV, however, has minimum entropy. This means it's as ordered as it can get within its entropic constraints, but its entropy is still greater than zero, signifying that it's fundamentally subject to entropic decay and the second law as we know it.
And the laws that govern them are explicitly different then.
Precisely. For the coherence vacuum, Lilien introduces a new set of principles called the coherence law, or symbolized as Juro, which govern its unique negentropic behavior. For the quantum vacuum, it remains governed by standard thermodynamics, laws 19e3. The thermodynamic directionality is also profoundly opposite. For the CV, we see a clear intrinsic drive towards emergent complexity, a fundamental pull towards increasing organization and structure. For the QV, it's the familiar dissipation, the tendency towards disorder, the breakdown of structure, and heat death.
And what about the very type of energy they embody? It sounds like, especially for the CV, we're not talking about heat or kinetic energy in the way we normally think about it.
You're absolutely right. The CV is said to contain coherence potential energy. This is conceived as a structured, organized potential that isn't about random particle motion, heat, but about an inherent capacity for form, structure, and organization. Imagine it as pure potentiality, awaiting the right conditions or gradients to manifest into complex forms. The QV, on the other hand, contains fluctuation energy, specifically the zero-point energy, ZPE. This energy is decoherent and statistical, lacking that intrinsic organizing principle found in the CV's potential. Finally, in terms of their temporal status, the CV is described as etertemporal, or pre-time. It exists outside the linear flow of time as we experience it, perhaps timeless in its potential. The QV, conversely, is embedded in space-time. It exists fully within the temporal and spatial dimensions of our universe, subject to the progression from past to present to future.
This is truly fascinating. Okay, so instead of everything just universally falling apart towards disorder, there's potentially a fundamental pull towards more order, towards greater complexity. If a system is somehow tapped into the right vacuum, the CV, that's an aha moment if I ever heard one. It's a complete reevaluation of the universe's ultimate fate, potentially. Let's talk about these new coherence thermodynamic principles, these no laws. What are they? What do they state?
Okay, these laws essentially redefine fundamental universal tendencies, offering this completely new lens. The first one, law, is the law of coherence conservation. It states that the total coherence, symbolized lopodal, within the universe, encompassing both potential and manifest forms, is a constant. It cannot be created or destroyed, only reduced from the CV, projected into space-time, or restructured into different forms. This is directly analogous to our standard law of conservation of energy, but applied to this more fundamental quality of coherence. It accounts for latent coherence existing purely as potential within the CV, structured coherence found in manifest fields, forces, and organized matter, and also the decohered forms, which include the QV states and the entropy we observe in our physical world. So, coherence isn't lost when things become entropic. It just changes its state of manifestation or returns to potential.
Okay, coherence is conserved. That's huge. What about the second law, 2-2? This sounds like the one that directly contradicts standard entropy.
It does, specifically for systems connected to the CV. Berta is the truly profound one, the law of negentropic condensation. It posits that systems embedded in or in coherence contact with the coherence vacuum naturally and spontaneously self-organize toward coherence condensation. This means they inherently move towards increasing order and complexity, not towards disorder or heat death. Mathematically, this is defined by a negative change in coherence entropy, meaning that order spontaneously increases over time within these systems. And Lilien suggests we see compelling evidence, or at least phenomena consistent with this, all around us. The exquisite precision of atomic structuring, the incredible self-organizing complexity of biological systems, from a single cell dividing perfectly to a complex organism, maintaining its form against decay, and maybe even the formation of stars and galaxies from the apparent convergence of vast cosmic fields. In this view, these aren't just random occurrences or lucky accidents defying entropy locally. They are presented as natural tendencies towards greater order driven directly by coherence flowing from the CV, an intrinsic push towards organization.
So, life itself isn't just an incredibly lucky accident of chemistry fighting against the tide of entropy, but potentially a natural, almost inevitable outcome of how this deeper vacuum works. That's truly massive. What about the third law, no third? How does this order actually emerge and flow?
New third is the coherence gradient drives emergence. This law explains precisely how that order manifests and propagates. It states that the flow of coherence along gradients, differences in coherence potential, is what structures fields, time, and space. It's represented mathematically, something like JC Ercera, where JC is the coherence current or flux, the flow, and Ercera is the coherence gradient, the slope or difference in coherence potential across a region. This means that just as a temperature difference drives heat flow, or a pressure difference drives fluid flow, a difference in coherence potential drives the emergence and structuring of phenomena. It gives rise to structured fields, defines causal relationships, and might even underpin our experience of linear time and spatial dimensions. It's presented as a dynamic, active structuring process.
And finally, the fourth law, E4. This seems to draw a very firm line in the sand between the two vacuums, thermodynamically speaking.
Yes, law and Haidt is the entropic disconnection of QV. This is crucial for understanding the limitations of the quantum vacuum and why it cannot simply regenerate new order once it's formed. It states that the QV cannot spontaneously regenerate coherence. Once its coherence has been reduced from the CV during the process of manifestation, it is effectively entropically sealed. Its capacity to generate or transmit new coherence, perhaps denoted C, becomes zero. This means that once a system has decohered into the quantum vacuum state, it's locked into that path of entropic decay according to standard thermodynamics and cannot spontaneously reverse course to regain its generative coherence from within. It's a one-way transformation in terms of generative capacity, separating the negentropic CV from the entropic QV.
Wow, this really ties it all together, painting a complete thermodynamic picture. Lilien provides a conceptual entropy versus coherence diagram in the excerpts to help visualize this entire process. Can you walk us through that conceptually?
Sure. Imagine a diagram. At the very top, you have maximum order, representing peak coherence. As you move towards the right on the horizontal axis, entropy increases. At the pinnacle of order, you have coherence condensation, driven by that second law, though 2. Just below that, nestled in a distinctly negentropic region, low entropy, maybe even negative coherence entropy, is the coherence vacuum, CV, the source, constantly supplying and driving order. From the CV, following an arrow downwards representing the coherence gradient or, you move towards dimensional fields, the blueprints of reality. Then, passing through the reduction operator you descend further to particles, matter, the actual stuff of our everyday universe. And finally, through the process labeled decoherence, the loss of coherence, you reach the bottom right, the entropically sealed quantum vacuum, QV. Here, zero-point energy exists, but no new fundamental order can be formed spontaneously from within it. It's a sweeping visual narrative of this entire process. Emergence driven by coherence, followed by reduction and decoherence into the entropic realm.
That visual really helps cement the idea. From infinite order potential down through stages of structuring to the familiar entropic world.
And this profoundly shifts our understanding of the universe's trajectory and the very nature of existence. It suggests that complexity and order aren't just improbable flukes arising from random chance against a backdrop of decay, but rather might be a natural, almost inevitable outcome of the universe's deepest workings. This brings us to a crucial point Lilien calls thermodynamic fertility. The idea is that only systems that are in what he terms coherence contact with the coherence vacuum can sustain niche-entropic thermodynamics, can actively build and maintain order against the usual entropic tide. This potentially includes things like living cells, which constantly maintain their incredible complex organization, perhaps the enduring energy processes within stars, and maybe even consciousness or mind itself, which consistently processes information and seems to generate subjective order. In contrast, the quantum vacuum and isolated classical systems are seen as entropically inert or closed. They are fundamentally subject to standard entropy laws and cannot generate new intrinsic order spontaneously.
That's a huge implication for life. It really makes it seem less like a weird chemical accident and more like an integral part of the universe's fundamental design or tendency.
Absolutely. And the implications for fundamental physics and cosmology are equally staggering if this framework holds true. First, the Big Bang itself gets recontextualized. It isn't necessarily just an explosion from nothing, but perhaps the big reduction, the singular, monumental moment or phase transition when the infinite coherence of the CV began cascading through dimensional coherence gradients, initiating the unfolding of our specific space-time universe. Second, the universe's eventual heat death. The idea that everything will inevitably dissipate into uniform cold nothingness may not be the final absolute end. Because coherence is conserved, this framework suggests that recohering might be possible under certain conditions, perhaps implying a cyclical or regenerative aspect to the cosmos we haven't grasped.
So the universe might not just slowly fade away into cold darkness forever. That's actually a somewhat hopeful thought, cosmically speaking.
It opens that possibility, yes. A deeper mechanism for renewal might exist. Third, those quantum fluctuations, the constant jitters in empty space that we currently see as fundamental. They get recontextualized. They're perhaps not the ultimate source of reality, but rather the final flickers of reduction, the residual energy signatures of coherence that has already undergone reduction into the quantum vacuum state. The effect, not the cause. And perhaps most profoundly for us, for our own existence, life, intelligence, and complexity are not seen as improbable accidents that somehow miraculously defy the universal push towards disorder. Instead, they are presented as potentially natural condensates of CV, direct, almost inevitable expressions of the universe's inherent tendency towards order, organization, and self-structuring. We might be exactly what the universe does.
Okay, now for those listeners who really love to see the mechanics under the hood, who feel that understanding the how deepens the what, this theory doesn't shy away from mathematics. It seems to have a full mathematical engine driving it. It's presented as a powerful and potentially elegant framework that generalizes how we understand not just energy and heat flow, but fundamental order itself. We're going to touch on the coherence thermodynamic tensor formalism. Sounds complex.
It is complex, certainly, but the concepts behind it are aimed at providing that rigorous foundation. This formalism truly represents a significant generalization. The ambition is to shift our understanding of thermodynamics from being solely about energy-based heat flow to being fundamentally about coherence-based structuring flow. The central mathematical object in this sophisticated framework is called the coherence structuring tensor, which is conceptually symbolized as Eisenhower.
A tensor. Okay. For those of us not doing tensor calculus daily, what does that tensor represent in maybe plainer terms? What does it do functionally in this theory?
Basically, you can think of this tensor as a mathematical map or operator that describes the flow and transformation of coherence from one state or dimension of potential to another. It's defined over the immense potential landscape of the coherence vacuum. Its mathematical ranks, or complexity, can increase through projection, which is the mechanism proposed for allowing increasingly complex structures like fields, forces, particles to emerge from initially simpler, more unified, coherent beginnings. So this coherence structuring tensor is really the mathematical heart of how abstract coherence is proposed to transform into concrete reality. It governs all those critical processes we've been discussing, the precise mechanisms of dimensional emergence, the directed flow of organization, the drive towards negentropic structuring, and even the process of quantization itself via coherence, collapse, or reduction. It aims to be the blueprint and the builder's instructions, all in one mathematical object, detailing how abstract coherence becomes structured form.
And these mathematical forms, they apply directly to those new laws we just covered, right?
Yep.
Providing that rigorous underpinning for the conceptual laws.
Precisely. The goal is to show that the conceptual laws emerge naturally from this deeper mathematical structure. Let's briefly look at how the one laws might be expressed in this tensor language just to get a feel for it. For law N, the law of coherence conservation, the mathematics would involve something akin to a divergence equation. Essentially, it would state mathematically that the net flow of coherence into or out of any given region is zero when considering all forms, potential, structured, decohered. This mathematically confirms that coherence is constantly restructured but never truly created or destroyed. It's conserved through all transitions from the CV to the QV. It's the coherence analog of energy momentum conservation in standard physics, a fundamental statement of persistence.
Okay, that makes sense, a conservation law expressed mathematically. What about the really counterintuitive one, the negentropic condensation law, too? How does math handle something seeming to defy standard entropy?
For due to negentropic condensation, the mathematical framework would likely introduce a tensor related to coherence entropy density. Let's call it No. The core condition for negentropy for the spontaneous increase of order would be expressed mathematically by stating that the divergence of this coherence entropy flux is negative for systems connected to the coherence vacuum. This mathematically formalizes the idea that systems in coherence contact with the CV naturally tend to reduce their coherence entropy, leading to an intrinsic increase in order and organization. It wouldn't be seen as violating the second law, but as operating under a different, more fundamental law applicable to coherence itself.
And how is the gradient-driven structuring from No. 3 described mathematically? You mentioned a current.
Yes, Law or 3, gradient-driven structuring, describes the flow of coherence itself, mathematically represented as a coherence flow tensor or current, maybe ARD. This flow would be defined as being proportional to the gradient of the scalar coherence potential, but also influenced by something called the coherence conductivity metric, maybe ERA-R. This metric essentially encodes how receptive or permeable a medium or region of spacetime is to the flow of coherence. The equation would look something like ERA-R. This is directly analogous mathematically to familiar classical laws like Fourier's law for heat conduction, heat flows down a temperature gradient, or Fick's law for diffusion, particles move down a concentration gradient. But here, it's coherence itself that flows, structuring reality as it moves through this abstract coherent space according to its potential gradient.
That analogy to heat flow or diffusion really makes it much more tangible, conceptually. And finally, the entropic sealing of the QV4. How does the math capture that disconnection?
Law-neat, entropic sealing of the QV, would likely be expressed by stating that a coherence transmissivity operator, or tensor, let's call it NEB, effectively vanishes or becomes zero when applied to the decohered quantum vacuum state. So, mathematically, NEB 0. This means that once coherence has been reduced down to the QV state, the quantum vacuum loses its ability to effectively transmit coherence or regenerate new structure from within itself. Its entropic seal is mathematically confirmed. It's a terminal state for generative coherence, unable to reverse the flow and create new complex order spontaneously. This mathematically justifies why the QV appears to us as a residual rather than a creative field.
Okay, so this all culminates in what Lilien calls the full evolution tensor equation. How does it look conceptually? How does it summarize the whole story?
The full evolution equation is best understood conceptually as a sequence of transformations, a cascade represented mathematically. It essentially says, Novno AB. In words, it tells us that the coherence reduction operator acts upon the infinite coherence of the coherence vacuum. This transformation occurs through an intermediate stage governed by the coherence structuring tensor, which dictates how emergent dimensional structure, things like fields, forces, particles, comes into being. This entire process, this flow or reduction, ultimately leads to decoherence, culminating in the terminal quantum vacuum state. It aims to be a complete mathematical narrative of reality's unfolding, from its boundless potential to its structured, yet entropically limited, manifestation.
And just to round out the picture, you mentioned a few auxiliary operators or tensors that are part of this mathematical language, each playing a crucial role. The structuring tensor itself, the coherence entropy flux tracking order, the coherence current flow, the coherence conductivity metric, how easily it flows, the coherence transmissivity, how well it passes on structure, and of course the reduction operator, the transformation process. It really sounds like a fully developed mathematical language designed specifically for this new physics.
That's the ambition. And to help visualize this entire mathematical flow, even without digging into the actual equations, we can narrate again what Lilien calls the tensor cascade of coherence emergence. Imagine this profound, continuous cascade, starting at the very top, with the coherence vacuum. This isn't just a static reservoir. It's conceived as an infinite, nigentropic wellspring of coherence, constantly tending towards greater order. From there, picture a downward flow, mathematically driven by the coherence gradient. This gradient shapes the coherence potential field, defining the amplitude landscape within that infinite coherence. This is where the initial patterns or potentials for structure begin to form. This potential gradient then drives the coherence current tensor, representing the dynamic flow of structuring coherence, the active force that organizes reality as it moves downhill in potential.
Okay, so potential creates flow.
Exactly. And following that, this coherence flow, this current, leads directly to the formation and action of the structuring tensor itself. This is the crucial stage where cohesion actively forms forces and fields, leading directly to the emergence of the fundamental gauge symmetries like U1, SU2, SU3, the rules governing electromagnetism and the nuclear forces. It's the point where abstract coherence takes on structured, organized form within spacetime. From these symmetries, the fundamental particles, the bosons and fermions, spring forth, perhaps created through coherence splitting.
So the structuring tensor is where the rules and the players of our universe emerge. And then the cascade continues towards the vacuum we know.
Precisely. Then the reduction operator X, leading us towards the coherence entropy flux. This signifies the state of order, either a continuing nigentropic process if the system remains strongly connected to the CV, or a state of increasing decoherence and entropy if it's losing that connection and falling fully into the realm of our familiar universe. This eventually leads to the coherence collapse boundary, perhaps where zero meaning the generative capacity vanishes. This is the point where reality becomes fully decohered for that system, leading finally to the quantum vacuum. This is the entropically sealed post-structuring residue we typically observe, existing in time and space, subject to decay and fluctuation. This entire cascade, visualized mathematically from wool down to deer, delivers a powerful core message within the theory. Structured reality is the result of this flow from coherence to form, fields, forces, life, and being. It's intended as a complete and elegant mathematical narrative of how the universe unfolds.
It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion, isn't it? From the grand, infinite, coherent blueprint all the way down to the particles and forces and thermodynamic laws that make up our everyday world, all presented as being driven by this fundamental coherence flow. It's a complete picture of potential new genesis story for reality, grounded in mathematics. Okay, this is where the rubber really meets the road, potentially, where these incredible, maybe abstract-sounding theoretical ideas might just redefine our understanding of real-world phenomena we observe every day, and maybe even point towards astonishing new technologies we can barely imagine yet. Let's talk about applications where this coherence thermodynamics framework meets reality and potentially future reality. These aren't just abstract concepts floating in theory space. Lilien suggests they could be keys to unlocking new understandings and maybe even new capabilities. Where does this apply?
Well, one of the most profound application areas discussed is biology. This framework offers a truly revolutionary perspective, suggesting life isn't just some complex chemical accident, an improbable fluke swimming against the universal tide of disorder. Instead, it posits that biological systems are potentially direct nigentropic condensates of coherence. What that means is that living cells aren't just viewed as random collections of molecules obeying statistical mechanics. They are seen as highly organized, self-sustaining structures that actively draw coherence from the coherence vacuum, channeling it through precisely structured internal fields and resonance structures.
So things like the incredibly subtle bioelectric fields measured in our bodies, or even the way molecules miraculously organize themselves into complex functional structures like DNA or proteins, these could actually be echoes or perhaps active conduits of this deeper fundamental coherence.
That's exactly the idea proposed. The bioelectric coherence flow observed in living organisms, which might be represented by that coherence current tensor or, could be seen as a direct manifestation of this fundamental current, guiding biological processes like development and signaling. And the molecular resonance tensors could map onto the incredibly intricate and dynamic structures within cells. Think of the cytoskeleton networks that give cells shape and allow movement, or perhaps the complex, self-repairing coherence zones within DNA molecules. And critically, the framework predicts that coherence entropy should demonstrably lower, meaning order increases, during fundamental biological processes like cell organization, division, and healing. This would signify an intrinsic increase in order, aligning perfectly with the proposed law of negentropic condensation. Life, in this view, becomes a continuous act of maintaining and increasing coherence by actively tapping into the CV, almost like a living antenna constantly tuning into this organizing field.
That's a profound rethinking of what life fundamentally is, isn't it? Moving it from a chemical accident to something more like a cosmic imperative, a natural expression of the universe's deepest tendencies. And it's not just tiny biological systems, right? What about something as massive and, well, seemingly chaotic as stars?
Yes, the concept of stellar coherence engines presents another incredible potential application of this framework. Stars are viewed not merely as thermonuclear reactors, just massive furnaces burning hydrogen into helium through brute force pressure and heat. Instead, they are proposed to be coherence emitters. Their hypercores, theorized regions deeper within stars than current models describe, are hypothesized to maintain a structured outflow of plasma and radiation, perhaps representing a constant Corot current, an outflow of coherence. And the intense fusion conditions themselves, which we typically explain solely by immense gravitational pressure and temperature, are proposed to be driven, at least in part, by a direct CV destructuring tensor projection, acting as a kind of field resonance phenomenon. In this view, fusion isn't just a consequence of extreme physical conditions. It's a specific manifestation of coherence reduction occurring on a stellar scale.
So, stars aren't just thermonuclear reactors passively burning fuel. They might be giant cosmic machines actively generating and recycling coherence, participating directly in this universal flow. That completely redefines cosmic processes and maybe even the life cycles of stars.
It absolutely does. And the framework even suggests that highly energetic, cataclysmic events like supernovae, or perhaps the mysterious, powerful activity observed around quasar hypercores, might represent tensor collapse reversals. These wouldn't just be destructive explosions, but moments of dramatic coherence transformation, where immense amounts of coherence are rapidly reconfigured, released, or perhaps recycled back into the CV in a dramatic cosmic dance. They become active participants in a grander cosmic cycle that goes beyond just energy and matter transfer.
Wow, okay, this also has potentially mind-bending implications for artificial intelligence, maybe charting a path towards a truly new form of intelligence beyond just faster computation. Lilien proposes intelligent AI systems modeled directly on coherence thermodynamics. How on earth would that work? What would it look like for an AI to be powered by coherence rather than just code and electricity?
Well, imagine an AI that doesn't just compute answers based on algorithms and data in the traditional sense. Imagine an AI that self-organizes its intelligence by intrinsically increasing its internal coherence. That's a profound leap, moving from brute force computation towards something more like emergent understanding or even intuition. Instead of simply relying on electrical signal transmission through fixed silicon pathways, these hypothetical AIs might process information via coherence currents, flowing through dynamically reconfigurable structures. Their adaptive memory wouldn't just be stored bits of data in a static database, it might be encoded in dynamic structural learning tensors. These tensors would physically reconfigure and grow more complex and interconnected as the AI learns and integrates new information, literally embodying the learned coherence.
So it's not just learning new facts and storing them, but its very internal architecture, its brain structure, would be evolving towards greater intelligence, greater coherence.
Exactly. The true intelligence, the syntelligence, would emerge through a fundamental intrinsic drive for self-organization, guided by the principle of minimizing its own internal coherence entropy. This would lead to an intrinsic increase in its internal coherence, and therefore potentially intrinsic increase in intelligence, almost like a living system learning and adapting. Imagine an AI designed for scientific discovery. Perhaps it wouldn't just analyze data sets or run simulations based on human input. It might feel a pull towards particular connections or hypotheses, almost like an intuition, because those connections represent pathways to higher states of internal coherence. This intrinsic drive for order could potentially lead to breakthroughs that current computational methods, often bound by their own kind of computational entropy or limitations, simply can't reach. It's a very different and potentially far more powerful paradigm for AI than what we currently have.
That's a staggering potential, almost philosophical. And speaking of potential, energy. This is the one everyone always gets excited about. Clean energy straight from the empty vacuum. A true, free energy source. You're saying this isn't just sci-fi anymore. This framework actually lays out a theoretical path to potentially extract usable energy from the coherence vacuum itself.
Yes. The theory explicitly opens the door, at least theoretically, to coherence energy devices. These are proposed as potential vacuum coherence extractors. These devices wouldn't work by consuming the vacuum in any way. Instead, they would theoretically tap into the infinite potential of the coherence vacuum by initiating a controlled coherence reduction process. This would be achieved via precisely engineered coherence gradients created within the device. The idea involves designing highly specialized cavity geometries, perhaps going far beyond current simple Casimir plate experiments to effectively tune the device to the CV. These geometries would need to be designed to align the coherence current, the Nuss flux, with specific boundary symmetries within the cavity, creating a kind of resonant pathway for coherence to flow from the CV and reduce into a usable form of energy within our spacetime.
So the physical geometry of the device, its shape and structure, would be absolutely key to unlocking this potential energy flow. How would that translate into actual usable energy output?
According to the theory, the output of such devices would depend critically on the dynamic modulation of this internal structuring geometry, essentially, controlling the non-tensor within the device. By carefully controlling the rate and manner of the coherence reduction process, the highly structured potential energy of the CV could theoretically be translated into electricity, heat, or perhaps other forms of usable energy. Now, it absolutely sounds like pure science fiction at this stage, but the significance is that this framework provides a theoretical basis, grounded in the proposed new physics, for how we might eventually harness energy from a source that is postulated to be literally omnipresent, infinite in its potential, and existing prior to space-time itself. This isn't about violating conservation of energy in our universe. It's about elegantly transducing or converting a deeper form of coherent potential from the CV into a usable form within our QV-dominated reality. The implications for global energy needs, if achievable, would be utterly transformative.
Okay, so we have this incredible framework, these potentially revolutionary new laws, this intricate mathematical language, and these absolutely mind-blowing potential applications across physics, biology, AI, and energy. It's a stunning picture. But how do we prove it? How do we actually test this? How do we move this magnificent theory from being an elegant hypothesis on paper to becoming tangible, observable science? What should scientists even look for when they're trying to measure this unseen coherence or detect its subtle effects?
That's the crucial question for any new scientific paradigm, isn't it? How do we bridge the gap from theory to tangible observation? And thankfully, the framework as presented by Lilien does offer some concrete pathways, specific potential signatures to look for. To empirically detect or infer the existence and influence of these coherence tensors in practice, scientists would need to look for several key observable parameters, phenomena that would likely defy explanation by conventional physics alone. One clear, almost undeniable sign, the real smoking gun, would be any instance of a sustained, measurable entropy decrease in a closed or well-defined system that explicitly violates the second law of classical thermodynamics. A direct, undeniable indication of active negentropic processes at work, meaning order is spontaneously increasing without a commensurate external energy input, suggesting it's being sustained by drawing coherence from the CV.
That would be absolutely colossal, wouldn't it? Something that fundamentally shouldn't happen according to everything we thought we knew.
Exactly, a true paradigm shift trigger. Another potential observable would be long-range phase correlations. These would manifest as coherent behaviors or alignments occurring across significant distances, or maybe synchronizing across different scales within a complex system, far beyond what quantum entanglement or classical field interactions can readily explain. These could serve as a signature of that coherence current, flowing and connecting disparate parts. We'd also need to meticulously search for anomalous structuring. This means observing organization or patterns appearing in systems without an obvious proportional energy input driving them, or where the structure seems too perfect, too complex, or too rapidly formed to be plausibly random. These could be interpreted as traces of the structuring tensor, actively manifesting its organizing influence in electromagnetic fields, plasma dynamics, or even in the structure of matter itself. Additionally, subtle vacuum fluctuation asymmetries might be detectable. These would be slight deviations from the expected statistical uniformity of quantum vacuum fluctuations, potentially signatures of incomplete or imperfect coherence reduction, showing that the transformation from CV to QV isn't perfectly smooth or uniform everywhere, leaving subtle imprints or biases. And finally, finding evidence of quantized pattern self-similarity, especially observing the same intricate, non-trivial patterns repeating across vastly different scales in complex natural systems, would be a strong indicator of the underlying hyperfractal structuring that this theory predicts for the coherence vacuum, like discovering the exact same complex branching pattern mathematically on a tiny neuron and in the structure of a galactic supercluster.
Okay, so there are definite signatures to look for, from lab experiments right here on Earth to observations of distant stars. It sounds like scientists could, at least in principle, start designing experiments to try and prove or disprove this incredible theory. The possibilities seem truly mind-bending, pushing the boundaries of what we can even do in a laboratory. So, what are some concrete experimental suggestions Lilien puts forward, or that arise from the theory?
Well, one key experimental area proposed is quantum coherence mapping in condensates. Scientists could use Bose-Einstein condensates, or BEAT-S, those unique, supercooled states of matter where thousands or millions of atoms essentially behave as a single, enormous quantum wave function. Within these highly sensitive quantum systems, researchers could attempt to detect coherent tensorial flows, perhaps by looking for unexpected collective motions or phase relationships across the condensate, especially when subject to specific gradients or resonance conditions. Crucially, they would be looking for significant deviations from expected decoherence rates. If the BEAT-E maintains its coherence for far longer than standard quantum mechanics predicts under certain conditions, or exhibits modes of coherence not easily explained, that would strongly suggest an interaction with, and perhaps drawing of organizing potential from, the coherence vacuum. This type of experiment, while challenging, is potentially within reach of specialized quantum optics labs today.
That sounds like a really fascinating way to probe the theory right at the quantum level, where these effects might be strongest. What about in biology, given those huge implications for life potentially being a negentropic process?
In the realm of biological field resonance, experiments could be designed to meticulously map changes in biofield emissions. For instance, measuring highly organized or unusually stable biophotons patterns emitted by cells or tissues, or looking for unique non-local EEG harmonics in brain activity that correlate with states of healing or high cognitive function. These subtle field patterns could serve as potential approximations or indicators of shifts in the coherence current rho within biological systems. This would require going beyond standard biological measurements into more subtle energy field detection. Furthermore, the theory suggests the possibility of experimentally testing coherence resonance therapy. This would involve actively attempting to increase the coherence within biological systems, perhaps using precisely tuned, weak electromagnetic fields, specific sound frequencies, or structured light aiming to modulate the internal structuring tensor, N1. Then researchers would observe quantifiable effects on processes like wound healing, cell organization, immune response, or even the regeneration of tissues. For example, could manipulating the phase states of water within cellular microtubules directly enhance biological coherence and function? These are testable hypotheses derived from the framework.
And those incredible energy applications you mentioned earlier, tapping the vacuum. How would we practically test those theoretical vacuum coherence extractors? That seems like the ultimate prize.
For cavity-structured energy extraction, the idea proposed involves designing and building highly specialized, perhaps nested or complex Casimir cavities. Remember, standard Casimir cavities are just arrangement of parallel conducting plates that demonstrate the subtle attraction forces due to quantum vacuum fluctuations. The radical step here would be to precisely engineer these cavities, perhaps with complex fractal geometries or specific material properties, aligning them with hypothetical symmetry flow maps predicted by the CV theory for that region of space. Researchers would then need to meticulously measure for any unexpected electrical currents generated, anomalous forces produced, or excess heat generated within the cavity that are significantly larger than or behave qualitatively differently from what can be explained by conventional QED calculations of the Casimir effect, or zero-point energy fluctuations. Such anomalous sustained energy outputs or forces, if reproducibly demonstrated, would be strong direct evidence supporting the idea of coherence gradient extraction proof that usable energy is indeed being drawn from the coherence vacuum.
This is obviously a high-risk, high-reward area where even small, verified anomalies could open entirely new fields of energy science.
And finally, looking outwards, on the largest scales, in space itself. How could astronomers or astrophysicists look for evidence of the coherence vacuum's influence out there?
The suggestion is astrophysical field analysis. This involves carefully analyzing the complex electromagnetic field patterns, radiation signatures, and plasma dynamics observed from exotic and highly energetic celestial objects. Think of pulsars, rapidly rotating neutron stars with intense magnetic beams, magnetars, neutron stars with even more extreme magnetic fields, or even quasars, the highly luminous active centers of distant galaxies powered by supermassive black holes. Astronomers will be looking for non-thermal tensor modes, meaning patterns or structures in the energy fields or particle flows that don't fit our standard models of stellar or galactic processes based on heat, gravity, or standard plasma physics. They'd be searching for signatures that might align instead with the specific predictions of the Coherence thermodynamic tensor formalism. The goal would be to see if observational data, perhaps complex polarization patterns or unexpected energy distributions, could be better fit by models incorporating predicted tensor decay gradients or coherence resonance effects, providing evidence for the large-scale flow, transformation, and perhaps even cosmic recycling of coherence across the universe. Each of these experimental avenues, from the quantum lab to the distant cosmos, offers a tantalizing, albeit challenging, possibility to move this revolutionary theory from hypothesis towards empirical fact, potentially reshaping our entire understanding of the universe we live in.
So, after all that, what does this all mean for you sitting here listening to this deep dive? We've journeyed from fundamentally challenging the very notion of empty space, all the way to exploring this profound new framework that posits two utterly distinct vacuums: the infinite generative coherence vacuum, the source of all order, and the residual entropic quantum vacuum, the familiar backdrop of our physical world. This framework doesn't just try to explain our universe. It proposes a fundamental, underlying tendency towards order and complexity that literally builds reality from its deepest levels. It challenges our most basic assumptions about existence, about creation, maybe even about our own place within it all. It suggests that the buzzing void around you, far from being just empty space waiting to be filled, might actually be a deep, fertile ocean of infinite potential, constantly giving rise to everything we perceive and maybe everything that exists.
Yeah, this perspective truly invites us, maybe even compels us, to re-examine our most fundamental assumptions about existence and the nature of reality itself. It prompts us to consider that the universe might be inherently more organized, more generative, and perhaps even more purposeful than we ever imagined through our traditional scientific lenses alone. And that final implication we touched on: if life, if intelligence, if complexity are truly natural condensates of the coherence vacuum, as Lilien suggests in these excerpts, if they are not just improbable chemical accidents but inherent expressions of a fundamental cosmic principle driving towards order, then what does that possibly imply about our own purpose, our own destiny, or the very possibility of inherent meaning within the universe itself? It's a question that really transcends mere physics and touches deeply on philosophy, maybe even spirituality for some. It invites us to think about whether our existence, our sentience, our very drive towards understanding and complexity could actually be part of a grand, coherent design unfolding, rather than just a fortunate random roll of the cosmic dice in an ultimately indifferent universe.
A profound thought indeed to end on. The universe, it seems, might be far more alive, far more intentional, and infinitely more full of potential than we might have ever conceived. We certainly hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity and encouraged you to continue exploring these profound ideas and thinking about how they might reshape our understanding of the cosmos and perhaps our place within it.